early biological explanations of why people commit crime were based on inherent physical traits. The central premise was that certain people are born biologically inferior and therefore destined to turn out to be criminals. These biological theories of crime became highly influential beginning in the late 19th century, but eventually fell out of favor entirely toward the middle of the 20th century. Now, why did this happen? Well, the reason centers around a pseudoscientific movement that sprung up from these heavily influential ideas of biological inferiority and determinism known as eugenics. And eugenics promoted the arrangement of society based on genetics, particularly when it came to marriage and childbearing. It was an extension, or actually better described as a perversion, of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, first published about a half-century earlier. Evolutionary theory centers on natural selection, where the natural environment selects characteristics, behaviors better suited for living in that environment. This selection process plays out very, very slowly, passed on from generation to generation as a species reproduces, with eventually those who survive down the line adopting these selected traits. Those who don't end up adopting these selected traits are less likely to continue reproducing, so their less suitable traits aren't passed on. This is where the phrase survival of the fittest stems from. But Darwin himself didn't apply these ideas to try to determine how people may end up behaving differently from one another in the present day, and certainly not who is going to turn out to be a criminal. No, instead, we have Darwin's half-cousin Francis Galton to thank for these developments. The same Galton who laid the foundation for modern statistics, first identifying the properties of correlation and regression to the mean, and the use of surveys for collecting data. And he developed some of the early ideas later adopted into instruments for measuring intelligence, and was instrumental in ushering in the use of fingerprinting in criminal cases. So his work has had quite an extensive impact. And in addition to these scientific advancements, he also coined the phrase nature versus nurture and the term eugenics, which means essentially well-born. The central premise of eugenics was to advance the capabilities of society by selecting the fittest individuals to mate and produce more fit individuals, and to at the same time prevent unfit individuals from mating, or at least from mating with those who were deemed to be fit. Basically, it promoted selective breeding, an attempt to breed out any traits that were considered undesirable. And so, logically, if individuals with physical traits that are designated as criminal are born that way, if they are biologically inferior, they certainly didn't qualify as being fit. And built into these assessments of fitness was a heavy prejudice based on race, ethnicity, nationality, class, and other things. Blacks, Jews, immigrants, Hispanics, Native Americans, the poor, the mentally ill, intellectually disabled were all deemed to be unfit because of this assertion of biological inferiority and determinism. And this was not some fringe idea. It was widely accepted, supported, and taught at the time. This, for example, came from a speech by paleontologist Henry Osborn, president of the American Museum of Natural History, at a eugenics conference in 1921. One of the things that eugenics served as the foundation for was forced sterilization programs that were instituted all around the world, including in the US. Across 32 states, at least 60,000 people, and from what I've gathered, that's a very low estimate, who were deemed to be feeble-minded or imbeciles.
They are identified early, categorized, feeble-minded, imbecile, idiot,
were forcibly sterilized against their will to prevent them from ever having children.
It would have been better by far if they had never been born.
Women had their reproductive organs removed, either their uterus or fallopian tubes. Men, the tubes carrying sperm cut and tied off. The victims were predominantly poor, and included a lot of white women and a smaller but still substantial number of black and white men. But black, Hispanic, and Native American women were by far the most targeted and suffered the most. Some estimates are that about a third of Puerto Rican women and somewhere between 25 and 40% of Native women were sterilized through the 1970s. These programs and the eugenics that they were based on were even legitimized and ruled constitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court in one of the worst decisions they ever made, Buck v. Bell, 1927, in an 8-1 ruling, a court headed by former U.S. President William Taft. To prevent our being swamped with incompetence, it is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime, or to let them starve for their imbecility, Society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. Justice Oliver Holmes, writing for the majority. And then there's the most infamous legacy of eugenics, the biological determinism it was based on, and the entire discipline of criminology as a whole. Combined with the goal of promoting racial hygiene or purity, eugenics was cited by the Nazis in Germany in support of the creation of their own programs designed to socially engineer a pure Aryan or non-Jewish white race, a master race, a superior race. This, of course, ultimately led to the systematic murder of over 6 million men, women, children, erroneously deemed to be racially inferior as lesser, unfit humans. The foundation of all of this tragic destruction was eugenics. Eugenics was based on the assumption, rooted in the positivist scientific paradigm popular at the time, that all data, regardless of how it was collected, demonstrated an objective, unquestionable reality and could therefore be used to justify laws and policies targeting any individuals fitting into groups who were deemed to be unfit. In reality, though, it was essentially an attempt to establish a scientific justification for prejudices that were highly prevalent at the time, and for laws that were established to maintain the existing social order that treated certain people as having less value than the dominant groups of society. After all, if members of a defined other group are dehumanized, no longer thought of as human beings but as objects or animals, it is easier to justify segregating them from the rest of society and denying them basic human rights. And if they are inherently inferior, inherently criminal, inherently incapable of change, what is the point of trying to reason with them? Provide them with adequate resources, healthcare, a good quality education, opportunities for advancement. If these premises hold, the only logical solution is to marginalize, segregate, or in the case of what the Nazis did, eliminate this other group. This is why any suggestion that one race, for example, is inherently more likely to be violent or criminal than another should be immediately dismissed. If we were to accept this premise, then we would have to accept that an entire race is somehow inherently inferior. That's really an astonishing claim to make, but it's one that was very widely accepted at the time, and still all too common even to this day. But it's a premise that we should wholeheartedly reject. We see exactly where it ultimately leads. Unfortunately, though, this view has never really gone away entirely and continues to be widely held today, continuing to drive how many of us think about who commits crime and the policies that should be enacted to address crime. Although support for eugenics as a legitimate science was waning as early as the late 1920s, it wasn't until after the revelations of the Holocaust that eugenics finally went by the wayside. Many policies it spawned, however, stuck around for far longer. Though all eugenics-based forced sterilization laws were officially repealed, some of these practices continued well into the 2000s, particularly in prisons, typically through emotional coercion and deception. As a result of this legacy of eugenics, and especially the horrors of the Holocaust, biological explanations of crime fell out of favor entirely for several decades after World War II, at least in the scientific community. During this time, little serious consideration was given to biological factors in trying to understand human nature. It wasn't until the 1970s that biological factors started to be taken seriously again as explanations for crime, but this time with a clear rejection of the notion that criminal behavior is entirely determined by biology. You can learn more about early biological theories of crime, as well as more modern biosocial theories that look at how biology interacts with our environment to influence our behavior in these videos right here.